Hey guys, it's the Comics Kid 2099 and I am back for another review. Before reading this book, I knew nothing about the character or the world of Starr the Slayer. I had read Warren Ellis and Salvador Larroca's New Universal, and Starr made a cameo appearance in a flashback-esque scene, but he had no dialogue, and I ultimately came away from that story knowing nothing about him or the comics he originally appeared in during the 1970s. Then I saw the 2009 Daniel Way Richard Corbin miniseries that had placed Starr the Slayer in a Max comic book. Marvel's Max line, for those who don't know, consists of material that is the equivalent to what you would see in a hard-rated R film. In addition to being more gruesome, gory, and graphic version of characters that exist in the Marvel Universe, the Max books do not use the same characters as the ones you might see in a comic book without the Max label. War Machine, the Punisher, and Starr are each about alternate versions of the same characters who you would see in the normal Marvel Universe. In any case, when I saw Starr the Slayer, A Star Is Born, I bought it at a used bookstore because I was curious if it was any good, and I liked the genre of sword and sorcery. Also, I really enjoyed the Conan the Barbarian archetype specifically. One thing I liked about this book is something that surprised me a great deal. I was expecting the language and the way people spoke in this story to be an approximation of Middle English, even though if the kingdom of Zardath really did exist, it would have been during the time of Old English, or more likely, the people wouldn't have used English at all. Instead of having a poor man's Old or Middle English, Daniel Way chose to have the characters speak very much like how you or I would speak today. This doesn't really bother me. Quite often, when I see a character who greatly resembles an older, more established character, as Starr does Conan, far too often, the new character paying homage to the older character does not have enough to separate himself from the older character. When this happens, it makes me say, what's the point? Why should I read the adventures of Starr the Slayer if they feel exactly like the adventures of Conan the Barbarian? And on that note, I didn't mind the profanities and the way people spoke as a whole resembling the way people speak in the year 2013. This is something that separates this version of Starr from previous barbarian characters, and that is very fine with me. Something else that separated this from any other barbarian story I've seen in any medium is the way Daniel Way connects it with the air quotes real world. This story begins with a singing bard in the kingdom of Zardath, and he is telling his audience that our story begins in another dimension in the land of New York City. We then see a brief synopsis of the life of the fictional creator of Starr the Slayer, Len Carson. This trick is not really new to comic books. In the 1960s and 70s, we saw plenty of examples of Marvel Comics superheroes interacting with the staff who worked at Marvel Comics. The conceit was that the superheroes actually existed, and that the comic book you were reading was actually a fictional account of an adventure that happened to the characters as told by some of the staff at Marvel Comics. And maybe the most famous example of air quotes reality intermingling with fiction is Grant Morrison's run on Animal Man. If you haven't read that series, I won't go into any more detail, but it does bear mentioning here. What Daniel Way does in this 4-issue miniseries is unlike any of the examples of fake reality mixing with the fiction of the world we are talking about. This is as good of a place as any to talk about the plot of this story. As I mentioned already, the story begins with Len Carson, the fictional creator of Starr the Slayer. We find out that he used to be really popular because of his stories about Starr, but when he tried to become a novelist, nobody really wanted him. Some years after his days of writing Starr, Len Carson begs his old editor to let him come back and write the origin of Starr the Slayer. It is at this point that the story jumps back and forth between cliché that we've seen many times in other stories about the muscle-bound barbarian type, or it chooses to indulge in weird plot holes that could have easily been fixed. Starr is a young member of a family who have come to the city in order to trade for medicine, because an illness threatens to wipe out their village far away. When they first arrive in the city, one of the inhabitants makes fun of Starr and his family for not wearing clothes. And, as is tradition when a barbarian has a disagreement with someone else, Starr kills the man. Starr's family are then arrested, and all of them except for Starr are killed. Starr is only allowed to live because Munja, the owner of an arena, buys him. When Munja later tries to force herself on Starr, he escapes and goes to live in a jungle outside of the city. While Starr was in the arena, Troll, the brother of the man that Starr killed, suddenly has magical skills which came out of nowhere, and he decides that he's going to kill the king of the city and usurp the throne. To do this, he uses his magic to travel to the strange dimension that is New York City, and he kidnaps Lynn Carson. Lynn Carson, the creator of this entire world, has the power to guide and control what happens, and if Carson is Troll's prisoner, then Troll can force events to happen in his favor. He does this, and he drives Munja and her gladiators out of the city, where Starr is suddenly awesome and isn't a whiner who acts like a teenager. Starr decides to lead the gladiators back to Zardath, where he wants to kill Troll and take the throne. He does this, and they easily beat Troll's army, and one of the only shocking developments of the story comes when Starr has the entire city burned after evacuating it, and they decide to rebuild Starr's kingdom from the ground up. I have numerous problems with this color-by-numbers plot. I don't like how, when we first see him, Troll is just a jerk who makes fun of outsiders coming into the city along with his brother. We see no evidence that he has aspirations of taking over the city, or even has an ounce of magic in his body. The best way this could have been fixed is if Daniel Way didn't feel like he had to tie Starr's origin to the villain of the piece, like so many superhero movies have to do. I'm thinking of Batman, Daredevil, Green Lantern, or the first Spider-Man movie. What if Troll was just a sorcerer who had aspirations of taking the throne when we first saw him? What if he had nothing to do with Starr killing the dude who made fun of his naked mother? I guess Way feels like he has to make it, air quotes, personal for Starr, and it is true that we might be lacking a little of that human feeling in the end if Troll wasn't somehow responsible for Starr's life sucking so much in this book. But it's still a problem, and I think I'd rather have a little less of that human feeling of revenge at the end than have this gaping plot hole of Troll suddenly becoming a sorcerer who wants to take over the city halfway into the book. If Troll needs Lynn Carson because Lynn Carson can manipulate and control reality in this dimension, then why is Troll able to kidnap Lynn Carson? Shouldn't Lynn Carson have first written that happening before it could actually happen? We later find out that Troll needs Carson because nobody else can control this magic typewriter. This implies that nothing can actually happen without Carson first deciding that it happens. This is a problem which could have been solved if Daniel Way had done something other than bringing Lynn Carson into the world of Starr. I was much more interested in seeing if there were going to be parallels in Lynn Carson's return to the world of Starr and Starr's origin story happening simultaneously. Instead, we got a plot development that really only complicates things and didn't make anything more interesting. To paraphrase Griff Tannen from Back to the Future 2, since when did Starr become the physical type? Starr escapes from Munja's arena at the end of issue 2, exactly halfway into the story. It's in most of issue 3 that we see Troll's rise to the throne of Zardath. For almost all of issue 3, we don't see Starr at all. It isn't until Troll does become king and drives Munja and her gladiators out of the city that we see Starr is almost unrecognizable. As I said earlier, in the first 2 issues, he's impulsive, he's whiny, and he feels weak even though he's a powerful gladiator. Now he's suddenly a cross between Conan and Aragorn from Lord of the Rings. He's confident, he's powerful, and in short, there isn't a single hint of the man he was in the first 2 issues. In the span of an issue, for Starr's character arc to happen off-screen is unacceptable. I wish we could have had a longer story where we actually get to see Starr become this character that we get at the end, instead of having it happen off-screen while he is participating in this very overused plot that we've seen many times before. All in all, I enjoyed this book. There were a couple of interesting ideas that were used as well as they could have been, like the way the characters spoke, or they were squandered and taken in a less interesting direction than when they started, like how Troll suddenly became an evil wizard or Lynn Carson had to be dragged into the story. This could have been a really interesting and engaging story, but it seems like Daniel Way just lost interest and phoned in a plot that feels almost identical to what we've seen in a few different Conan the Barbarian stories, which is a shame considering how much I really did enjoy what we did get, flawed as it is. I feel like it could have been a much greater story, and I would have enjoyed it even more if Daniel Way had worked out some of these plot inconsistencies. As is, if you enjoy sword and sorcery type stories or barbarian type stories like Cole and Conan, then you would probably enjoy Starr the Slayer, A Star is Born. If you've not any interest in those stories, then I would say you can safely skip this story without missing anything at all.